Not really, but
Well.
I'll just say Jane, because the only way I could get out of many things was to tell people.
At 78 years old, Sally Field has nothing left to prove. With 2 Academy Awards, a lifetime of unforgettable performances, and a cherished place in the hearts of audiences worldwide, she's carved out one of the most respected careers in Hollywood. But behind the curtain of accolades and admiration lies another story. A quieter, more painful narrative that the public rarely glimpses. It's the story of a woman who remembers every slight, every betrayal, and every on-set clash that left its mark. Now, with the clarity that comes with age and experience, Sally Field is finally naming the 6 co-stars who caused her the most anguish. These weren't petty disagreements or momentary tensions. They were deep, scarring encounters that altered the trajectory of her life and work. Episodes she carried with her long after the final take. Think you know the real Hollywood? This list may prove otherwise. Let's begin with the heartbreaker, Burt Reynolds. Their relationship captivated the tabloids. Sally Field and Burt Reynolds, a Hollywood power couple in the late 1970s. On screen, their chemistry was palpable, lighthearted, witty, and magnetically charming. Their film Smokey and the Bandit became a box office sensation, largely thanks to their dazzling dynamic. But away from the camera, the truth was far darker. Sally later described Burt as controlling, a man consumed by dominance who saw threats in anyone who might outshine him, including her. He routinely undermined her, making cutting remarks about her appearance, dismissing her intellect, and subtly chipping away at her confidence. What appeared in public as a fairy tale romance was, in private, anything but. In her memoir In Pieces, Sally unveiled the reality she'd kept hidden for years. Burt often shut her down mid-sentence, dismissed her input on projects, and insisted on making decisions for them both, professionally and personally. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a compliant accessory. She described being paraded like a trophy, expected to smile and remain silent, while her true self disappeared behind his domineering presence. The emotional manipulation was relentless. One moment, he was warm and affectionate. The next, he would retreat emotionally, using silence and withdrawal as weapons. The cumulative damage was profound. Even at the pinnacle of her stardom, Sally admitted to feeling invisible. "I never felt truly seen," she recalled. "I was present, but not fully myself." Despite years of effort to sustain the relationship, she was haunted by the realization that she never truly knew the man behind the public persona. "I wanted to love him. I did love him," she confessed. "But he hurt me." To the world, he was the charming bandit. But to Sally, he was sorrow cloaked in charisma. And heartbreak was only the beginning. The egotist, Tommy Lee Jones. When Sally Field signed on to star in Back Roads, she was hopeful. The film was gritty and offbeat, a unique character study she was eager to dive into. But the experience turned out to be one of the most emotionally draining of her career. And the cause of that tension was her co-star, Tommy Lee Jones. From the outset, he was standoffish, cold, and uninterested in building any kind of rapport. He didn't just ignore pleasantries, he froze her out entirely. There were no friendly chats during breaks, no exchanges of ideas, no camaraderie, just silence. For an actress like Sally, who thrives on emotional openness and shared creativity, Jones's behavior was a complete shock. He arrived, hit his marks, delivered his lines, and vanished. He made no effort to connect, neither as a performer nor as a person. The disconnect was palpable. Her attempts to bridge the gap, initiating conversations, discussing character development, even light joking, were consistently rebuffed. At times, he wouldn't even make eye contact. He made her feel like an outsider on her own set, as though her presence was an inconvenience. When Backroads premiered, critics noted a lack of spark between the two leads. What audiences didn't realize was that the icy on-screen relationship mirrored the reality behind the scenes. The issue wasn't the script, it was the frigid environment. Sally would later reflect, "We were supposed to portray two broken people falling in love, but I was acting alone." While she remained professional throughout, she admitted the experience drained her emotionally. Working with Tommy Lee Jones wasn't just difficult, it was disheartening. After Backroads, the two never worked together again. She never publicly condemned him, but her restrained comments in later interviews spoke volumes. That kind of coldness, she implied, stays with you. The loose cannon, Robert Blake. During the filming of Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole, Sally Field faced one of the most erratic and unsettling working experiences of her career. Her co-star, Robert Blake, was known for his intense method acting, but what she encountered went far beyond dedication. From the very first days of production, Blake was unpredictable and disruptive. He frequently went off script, altering lines without notice and introducing unscripted behaviors that threw entire scenes off balance. For Sally, who valued discipline and preparation, this was more than just unprofessional, it was sabotage. She accused Blake of deliberately undermining her both during scenes and behind the scenes. He created chaos where there should have been cooperation. Crew members echoed her complaints, citing outbursts, tirades, and wild mood swings that made the set feel like a pressure cooker. One day, he'd be calm and focused. The next, he'd lash out over minor grievances or storm off set entirely. Trying to maintain her performance amid this instability, Sally often found herself mediating just to keep things on track. But there was no fixing the dysfunction. It had already taken root. Eventually, the strain became too much. The production crumbled, and Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole was shelved before it could ever reach the screen. For many, it was a professional disappointment. But for Sally, it cut deeper. She described the experience as not merely frustrating, but deeply traumatic. "There are actors who act," she once said, "and there are actors who tear others down to feel bigger." Blake was the latter. Her words were sharp, pointed, and deeply personal, reflecting the emotional toll the project had taken. She walked away with a vow. Never again would she allow destructive egos to masquerade as artistic brilliance. Shirley MacLaine. When Steel Magnolias hit the big screen, audiences were enchanted by the emotional story and the stellar cast, particularly the pairing of two iconic actresses, Shirley MacLaine and Sally Field. On the surface, it appeared to be a dream collaboration. Two powerhouse talents portraying layered characters in a tale filled with love, loss, and strength. But behind the curtain, their dynamic was anything but cinematic bliss. From the outset of production, friction began to surface. Sally Field approached the project with deep emotional investment, immersing herself fully in the character of Malin, a grieving mother navigating unbearable sorrow. Her goal was clear. She wanted to portray raw, unfiltered truth. But Shirley MacLaine saw the set as a battlefield rather than a place for vulnerability. According to whispers from crew members, Shirley often hijacked scenes by asserting dominance, frequently boasting about her Oscar achievements and brushing off directorial notes. She'd even cut into scenes that weren't centered around her just to snag a moment of the spotlight. Despite the challenges, Sally tried to remain professional. She kept a polite demeanor, hit her marks, and focused on delivering the performance the story required. But the emotional toll was immense. In one gut-wrenching scene, Sally had to redo her performance 17 times, not because she missed the mark, but because Shirley kept undermining the moment with inappropriate quips, shifting the tone from tragedy to satire. It felt to Sally like an intentional effort to dull the emotional impact of her most critical scenes. Years later, Sally made vague references to the on-set experience in interviews, never naming names outright, but commenting that some actors brought a storm of chaos wherever they worked. It wasn't about harboring resentment, it was about recognizing a fundamental clash. Shirley seemed to need control and admiration, while Sally only wanted to serve the truth of the story. And that difference left wounds that lasted long after filming wrapped. For audiences, MacLaine's monologue may have triggered tears, but for Sally, the real heartbreak played out far from the camera. James Woods. If working with Shirley MacLaine had left Sally emotionally drained, her experience with James Woods left a deeper, more lasting scar, one that struck at her core as an artist and a person. The two were cast opposite each other in Kiss Me Goodbye, a lighthearted romantic comedy meant to be whimsical and endearing. But from the very first day on set, Sally sensed a troubling undercurrent, and it came directly from Woods. Known for his cerebral, sometimes dark intensity, James Woods didn't just act. He dissected, deconstructed, and sometimes demolished the spirit of a scene. What should have been playful banter became intellectual warfare. Woods regularly rewrote lines without consulting the director, delivered unexpected dialogue during rehearsals, and challenged every creative choice made by others. For Sally, who prized emotional honesty and collaboration, it was like navigating a minefield. She later recalled feeling steamrolled by his need to dominate, describing Woods as someone who used intellect not to collaborate but to control. During filming, he often offered unsolicited critiques of the script, the direction, and worst of all, her performance. On particularly intense shoot days, he'd casually suggest she wasn't fully committed, that her emotional delivery lacked authenticity. The words may have sounded constructive, but the intention, to her, felt poisonous. What stung the most wasn't the critique, it was the condescension. Sally didn't feel challenged to grow, she felt diminished. After fighting tooth and nail to be taken seriously in an industry skewed heavily toward male power, the idea that she was being emotionally undermined was more than just frustrating, it was devastating. Reflecting on that time, Sally later admitted that it wasn't the demands of the role that wore her down. It was having to constantly prove her worth in the shadow of someone who seemed intent on shrinking her spirit. From that point forward, she made a personal vow. Never again would she allow herself to be devalued under the guise of artistic genius. Dustin Hoffman. Perhaps the most unexpected and disillusioning encounter in Sally Field's career came not from a co-star, but from an actor she never actually worked with on screen. Dustin Hoffman. To the public, Hoffman was a titan of cinema, celebrated for his profound performances and a shelf full of accolades. But to Sally, a brief experience in the early 1980s would reveal a very different side of the man, a side she would never forget. Their paths nearly aligned during the audition process for a film that ultimately was shelved before production. For Sally, it seemed like a promising collaboration with one of the greats. But the chemistry read turned into one of the most humiliating moments of her professional life. Even before she entered the room, Hoffman had taken control, laughing with producers, nitpicking the script, and asserting his dominance. When Sally began her reading, Hoffman interrupted repeatedly, not to improve the scene, but to interject his opinions, correct her delivery, and question her character interpretation in front of everyone. It wasn't guidance, it was dismantling. Sally, already a decorated actress, said she felt reduced to an amateur, like a nervous schoolgirl being scolded. The disrespect hit hard. The insult deepened days later when a mutual acquaintance informed her that Hoffman had openly bragged about sabotaging the audition. According to him, the lack of chemistry was intentional. He had made sure the project wouldn't move forward with her in the role. To Sally, it was not just unprofessional, it was vicious. In the weeks that followed, she wrestled with self-doubt, wondering if she'd misread the room or failed in some way. But time and clarity brought the truth into focus. It wasn't her performance that fell short. It was Hoffman's overwhelming need to assert control, even at the expense of someone else's opportunity. Sally later said it was one of the most degrading experiences she'd ever faced in her career, and it fundamentally changed her. From then on, she made a silent commitment to herself. She would no longer work with men who mistook arrogance for brilliance. And to this day, she's kept that promise.